Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our next installment of Fireside Chats with our founder. Today we have Cathy Roberson joining us, the founder and president of Logistics Trends and Insights.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, we have our founder and CEO, Shalabh Singhal.
Thanks, Nick. Cathy, glad to join you. And I think the topic that we are discussing today is going to be very relevant for our audience, both you and as well as Trademo, and for the freight forwarding community in large. So looking forward to it.
Me too. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. So I appreciate y'all asking me to participate.
Our pleasure.
Absolutely. And on that subject, today we are going to be discussing what steps can freight forwarders take to future-proof their business plans and operations. And we're going to put our first question out to our guest, Cathy, today. What are some of the key factors currently impacting freight forwarders in the supply chain ecosystem?
Well, to be honest with you, I think it's the same issues that has been affecting freight forwarders for years and years. In times of high demand for international trade, whether it's imports or exports by air or ocean, folks need a freight forwarder as a partner together to get to the best capacity at the best prices. And you know as well as I do, the market goes up and down quite often, and we've seen some drastic swings over the past couple of years where capacity was a major issue regardless of the type of transportation a shipper was needing. Ocean, air, rail, trucking, all the way down to the last mile. So as a result, you know, the folks started turning more and more towards freight forwarders just to find that capacity from an international perspective. But there's also domestic freight forwarders, you know, brokers, for lack of a better description, out there trying to look for the capacity. And during the pandemic, which is the time period I'm referring to, it was this: get me the capacity no matter what the price is. We need to get our inventory in. Now the tables have kind of turned. Now the shippers are going, whoa, time out. The costs are a concern. They're trying to mitigate these costs. So the freight forwarders now are faced with, there's quite a bit of capacity in the market, regardless of the mode of transportation. Meanwhile, the shippers, their customers are going, wait a minute, we need to start mitigating these costs. So that's what we're looking at right now. And again, it's all very cyclical. It all goes based on economics. When you see the economies going up and down, and I've been in this market for well over 20 years, it's the same thing.
Yeah, would love to get your take on that, Shalabh, as well.
Yeah, I think what Cathy just covered are obviously some of the core challenges on how to manage the demand and supply in a typical freight forwarding business, while ensuring that there are margins and there are no kind of financial liabilities for the forwarder himself. But I think there are some new trends also, which I think might be posing a challenge, or are effectively posing a challenge to a lot of freight forwarders. I think one of that is the increasing competition in this particular space. A lot of digital freight forwarders backed by VC firms today coming up with a lot of new technology to be offered. Obviously, is a challenge for traditional freight forwarders who might be strong on certain relationships with the carriers, but not definitely having a lot of tech DNA. Then some of these container lines also, or asset owned companies, which are looking at supply chain management service as a high margin, capex free kind of opportunity, and trying to integrate those offerings into their existing services. I think that is also somewhere eating into the business of freight forwarders. I think just to add to it, another trend which I think is kind of more recent is the growth of cross-border e-commerce, right? And typically, the way freight forwarders have been managing their deliveries, their parcels, it has changed due to the sudden boom in the number of small parcels that need to be shipped worldwide into e-commerce. And how do they ensure the audit of those parcels, meeting with the customs regulations and ensuring that freight forwarders are not at fault for shipping wrong parcels into the industry, for misclassification of HS codes and so on. So these are, I think, all challenges which industry is not very well prepared for. But yes, I think the freight forwarders are realizing this today.
Yeah, some very interesting observations there, and it comes back to the old adage of supply and demand will dictate everything. The market decides the rate, and everyone really looking for that Goldilocks spot, that sweet spot in the middle.
Yep.
Fantastic. Shalabh, we'll kick this next question off to you. Can you provide any insights into some of the best practices for freight forwarders that are seeking to mitigate risk and uncertainty in the current economic climate?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is one of the outcomes also for this Fireside, and happy to share my thoughts on this. I think the first suggestion would be that freight forwarders really need to get out of the trap of this commoditization which is happening in this industry by differentiating their business, right? And just taking on example which I just gave, like there might be a lot of digital freight forwarders who might be coming on this industry, but even the traditional freight forwarders have an edge owing to their connections into the industry or their industry knowledge. So now I think what they need to do this is couple it with the digital transformation or the technology piece, with the all industry knowledge and connections that they have to build a more integrated offering for their customers. I think the second, just to build on that, is the overall digital transformation. Owing to all the digitalization that we have seen in the past few years and the experience which customers need in almost every industry, they also expect more centralized data, better tracking, and better customer service from their freight forwarders. So what this means is that today it won't be enough if you are just relaying information to your customers on emails, on calls, right? They want a centralized system where they can track their shipment from point to point. Then there is a, like, just to from the in the digital transformation piece, it's also important that these freight forwarders are making their businesses more efficient by automating a lot of manual tasks, by cutting out their repetitive work, so that they can attract talent and they can make their talent more productive. And just building the predictive side of the capabilities. And I think the example which, for example, Cathy also talked about all the supply and demand mismatch, and which causes a sudden spike or drops in the container prices, shipping rates. It's important that freight forwarders start collecting more and more the order and shipment information, and start leveraging some kind of a digital tool which can analyze all of this data and optimize their predictions with respect to the demand. And once their forecast accuracy improve, they should be able to procure more space ahead of the time. So obviously there can't be 100% solution to it, because there are so many forces which are playing here, which can affect these dynamics. But at least starting with a system and having some kind of sense of where our demand is going, where the industry is going, is important today. We can't be just have no investment into this particular space. I think the other thing which need is the insurance, right? Very basic, but I think still I see a lot of freight forwarders who miss on this particular basic aspect. Given all these disruptions and uncertainty, it's highly recommended that freight forwarders protect their business in event of any accident, delay, loss of damaged goods, and so on. So yeah, I think these are a couple of my thoughts on this.
I agree. I do agree. Now, when I was working in a freight forwarding group, back in the early 2000s. It was pre-digitization. So everything was done on a spreadsheet, phone calls, running up and down stairs to get approvals from various departments. Yeah, it was fun. It was, and I'm being facetious there. It was time consuming. And by the time we finally got approval to move an item on behalf of our customer, it was several days. So can you imagine, if you needed to move something super fast?
Yeah.
Thank goodness for technology. But at the same time, I am still old school enough to say relationships do matter. Okay? People matter. Your technology is your tool. It's the people behind that knowledge is what shippers are looking for. Yeah, to do those basic shipments, where, you don't expect any upheaval, delay, or anything, just a basic day-to-day shipment. Yes, those online platforms are super fantastic. But there's always that one-off, that's going to go crazy and end up somewhere or sitting on the tarmac, at an airport that someone forgot. So that's where your freight forwarder comes in. They act as a partner. And I think that partnership is super important. And in today's environment, and this is something I've been saying for well over 10, 15 years, environments change on a regular basis. Look at what we're facing now. More and more risk, geopolitical risk, natural disasters, economic, so on and so forth. And oh, by the way, globalization is not dead. It is shifting. It's evolving. That's where you need to lean on your freight forwarder to help guide, make those recommendations, to provide those updates. I think that's very, very important. And as far as digital versus traditional freight forwarders, those traditional freight, it's graying. That is really graying. So how do you define a digital freight forwarder today? As a, now what, 5-10 years ago, it was easy because a lot of our traditional providers had no idea. And when you saw these digital freight forwarders pop up, it was so disruptive in the market. Now traditional players have caught up. Maybe not entirely, maybe they have. It depends. But at the same time, these freight forwarders are all embracing more and more task, for lack of a better description, helping more with these strategies beyond the transportation management. They're moving inland. They're helping out with the warehousing. They're helping out with the trucking, that last mile, and so on. Yeah, e-commerce, whether it's B2C or B2B, is playing a huge role in this. And then we're seeing our friends, UPS, FedEx, the integrators, playing a big role in this. And yeah, by the way, I did come from the freight forwarding group at UPS, so I've seen it evolve. So yeah, it's fascinating to watch.
Yes, some really interesting insights from both of you there, and this really naturally dovetails into our next question. We've been touching upon this there, Cathy, as you mentioned, the importance for relationship, but then also the need to evolve and take a more data-centric and technologically driven approach to find what is this new hybrid between your digital freight forwarder and your conventional freight forwarders. And I guess on that subject would love for some more insights from you as competition does increase in the freight forwarding industry. What steps can organizations take to ensure that client retention and, most importantly, the reoccurring revenue that comes with it?
Well, like I said, partnering, being a good partner with your customers, and they shouldn't be considered customers. They're a partnership. It's a strategic partnership. Understand their strategies. What are their goals, and so on and so forth. And I think today you're seeing. Well, let me back up here. How do you define a freight forward in today's environment? We've seen a lot of changes over the past few years where the Kuehne+Nagels, the DSVs, the larger players are morphing into these 3PLs, 4PLs type of capabilities. So, whatever a 3PL is, differentiating from a traditional 3PL and a freight forwarder is also something that needs to be worked on. Saying that, as I said, understanding your customers' needs is so important. That data that you can share, that y'all mentioned previously, super important. Being able to have that business intelligence to share with your customers, to analyze and to make suggestions is vital. And that merging into transportation. So you've seen Kuehne+Nagel take on some airplanes over the past few months, seen our friends in the ocean freight market, like Maersk, CMA CGM, taking on some airplanes as well. Competing against that, just being the best partner is really vital. There are some very long-standing freight forwarders. They've been around forever. They stuck with their niche. They're still there. They're still very, very important. And it shows the market that they depend on those partnerships, those relationships and such.
We'll pivot the mic over to you there if there was, some additional context you wanted to add or build onto that.
Yeah, sure. So I think, first of all, completely in agreement with what Cathy said, since you asked about retention, recurring business from the existing clients. So being a partner with them, which they would value, irrespective of different dynamics at different points of time, or different kind of trends or technologies that may come. I think that's the key. I think the other two factors which I think are important are, first of all, developing some kind of specialization. I think gone are the times when especially small freight forwarders who do not have a lot of outside capital or a lot of other kind of resources at their disposal can be very commoditized players. So they need to find their specialization in a particular trade lane, product category, any type of container, inland transport, integration of other services like Cathy talked about, right? So they have to kind of see it from this perspective, even if they have strong relationships with the customer. But eventually they would be able to scale it only if they have differentiated themselves out somewhere. I think the other key, which like we also observe in our communications with a lot of shippers, is their expectations on the transparency and visibility side. And I think that's becoming more of a, I would say, common expectation from all the freight forwarders one is working with, right? So customers today require some kind of visualization that can tell us that, okay, where are my products right now? Any bottleneck that is there in my supply chain. They want more transparency in charges like demurrage, detention, and I think going forward it would be the carbon emissions also in their entire supply chain. So investing in tools or just thinking or designing about that process, which gives much more transparency and visibility to the customers at every stage, I think that's the key.
Very interesting observations there, and it will be interesting to see, if these players make this decision to be, jack of all trades or masters of one as it relates to the industry and commodity sections that they serve. Shalabh, this I think definitely falls a little more into our wheelhouse, so we'll kick this one off with you. For freight forwarders that are looking to take a data-driven approach, what should they consider when evaluating technology partners, and what metrics should be considered when benchmarking success?
Yeah, so I think, as Cathy also said, like in past 1 decade or so, there have been so many technology players, and it's becoming difficult to say which which is actually a digital freight forwarder and which is not. And like more and more freight forwarders are considering adopting different technology solutions. I think the change which is happening right now with some kind of maturity which has come into the industry is people are moving away from this notion of technology improving something to asking for some concrete metric which this particular investment can improve. And I think one of the key metric which in my sense should be tracked is revenue per employee for a freight forwarder, right? Given the nature of this business where you are consolidating supply and demand. But there are other metrics also which can be tracked against their respective investments in technology. And I think I can give a few examples, but there could be many more, right? So for example, on-time delivery. Does this investment allows me to improve my performance with respect to on-time delivery for my customers, right? That's what the customers would want from the freight forwarders. Given the nature of this business, you're always looking for leads and their conversion. How does this particular software investment helps me grow my business, helps me reduce my lead cost, help me improve my overall lead conversion time, right? And then I think again with related to visibility or transparency, which certain kind of digital tools can provide, is what is the ratio of value added cost or surcharges, right? So any shipper would expect forwarder to help them minimize their exposure to these kind of surcharges. We talked about demurrage, detention, and so on. So is this investment really helping my customers avoid those kind of surcharges or extra charges? So I think these are a couple of I would say metrics which can be tracked against your technology investment and should be reviewed in time.
Very well put. And Cathy, we'll love to get your insights on this as well.
I 100% agree. On-time performance is critical. Also, the ability to compare and to rate the provider or the carriers themselves. So if the freight forwarder has a relationship with a set number of air freight carriers, for example, one is consistently not on time. If they're able to provide that feedback to the freight forwarder, so maybe that correction could be made or somehow or another. Also the transparency, totally agree. But not only transparency, and I'm not sure if this really falls into the data part, but to look at it, to be able to have that clear picture is great, but to see your freight veering off somewhere and you can't doing anything about it while it's still in midair or in the middle of the ocean is a little concerning. And I'm not sure if we're quite there yet to manage those exceptions in real time. Maybe we are. I haven't quite seen that yet. And that may be another topic down the road. But from a last mile perspective, and I know this is a freight forwarding conversation, the ability to see the breakout, those costs, all those surcharges is so important. Not only last mile, but just clear across the board, because that's been very difficult over the years in trying to understand that invoice. Cost savings, on-time delivery, managing exceptions are the three main critical parts of managing such a relationship and such.
Yeah, definitely some heady things to consider there. And I think, what I take from that is, really have to holistically look at everything from start to finish and prioritize how you're going to triage based on, where the greatest blood flow is. Building on this notion of leveraging data to improve efficiency. As the freight forwarding industry takes a more data-centric approach, how do you foresee data sharing programs being adopted and evolving over the coming years?
Yeah, I think excellent question, Nick. And I think something which most of the freight forwarders might not be thinking about this already. So I believe, given so many challenges that there are in the logistics industry that are to be solved, and like so many unforeseen challenges that comes, right? Data sharing is becoming more like a must, rather than thinking about data which should be guarded in some walled garden, right? And I believe, like, so the technology that we have seen in recent years is a permission blockchain, which can bring, in this case, I would say, partners like terminals, carriers, shippers, your truckers, customs authorities, even financial institutions like trade finance companies, who can kind of contribute as well as exchange data on these blockchain platforms, which allow data privacy as well as permission to access or exchange this data. I think we are going to see emergence of more such platforms in future. And I believe, just so that these platforms will stay neutral, for example, the way we have seen emergence of credit bureaus in countries, or in developing markets where there were no credit bureaus 20 years back. So a lot of banks came together and started developing these credit bureaus. Similarly, for these kind of data exchanges, which can allow contribution of data from different relevant stakeholders in global supply chains, they would be first having some kind of ownership in these data exchanges, just to build neutrality, just to build kind of, I would say, transparency and trust. And then they would have some kind of membership network or partner network, where they would allow access to this data in a secure and I would say kind of a private layer. So yeah, and I think this is becoming very important, because given the challenges that we have, and given so many parties which exchange products or information during this entire supply chain, this is not one company or one kind of, I would say, industry's problem to solve. So people have to collaborate and solve these problems. I see lot more new initiatives being driven by governments as well to promote these kind of data exchanges. And I think these are the kind of platforms which would help us meet these ESG norms, help us drive more transparency, more efficiency in all the operations. So like for freight forwarders, eventually being able to access data from these platforms, contributing their data, and just keep an eye on these kind of initiatives is important.
Absolutely. Over to you, Cathy.
Sharing is, and collaborating, even among your competition, is becoming more and more important. And that, I have to admit, and you can tell by my age, how long I've been in, it's very difficult for a lot of us that's been in the industry for so long to grasp, to understand, because we were all brought up, believe it, no, don't share anything with that freight forwarder. But that was also at a time that I think freight forwarding was really more of a commoditized type of service. Everybody was doing the same thing. And now freight forwarding has evolved so much. And the data has just gotten even more important. But you're right, we do have some regulations coming down from the government that's going to encourage everyone to share more. And I think that's also important to note. And there are technologies such as blockchain that is pretty secure. Don't get me started on blockchain, but it is, for the most part, secure. And so that the security part is where I tend to lean towards. How secure is this data sharing? And, this linking up, for lack of a better description. How safe is it? And whose fault is it going to be if data leaks out to the wrong people or what have you? How do you, what do you do in those situations? But no, data sharing is becoming more and more important, but it's also being embraced by more people, which is great to see. It really is. And I think when today's environment, it's critical. I mean, you've got to share.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So
Just to add to it, Cathy, like I've seen similar problem statements in other industries, especially finance industry, and there something like blockchain was never required. We are talking about something, obviously credit bureaus is very old. I've seen this emerging in new markets, but there mostly it used to be a kind of bilateral or at max three parties involved, right? So there will be a, let's say, lender who is lending to someone, he's kind of submitting the data to the bureau, and then either the consumer or any other lender can consume that data, right? But here the challenge is that there are endless parties involved. Like you have freight forwarders, you have customs, you have trade finance institutions, you have these shippers, intermodal, right? And everyone wants access to something. So this is a more complex problem to be solved. And I think I also share some kind of skepticism on blockchain, right? We have seen models failed. We have seen where I think the adoption was a major problem, right? But being on the optimistic side, I believe there have been learnings before. There are some models which I've seen in few countries which are developing, and they came with the kind of right mindset. Many more, rather than being a closed project between two entities, it's more distributed project across many different industry leaders or stakeholders. So yeah, just keeping our optimism high on that front.
But if I may say, I have seen some successes within the use of blockchain as well. So more failures, but there have been successes. So, like any technology, if it's used in the right way, the right mindset, it's gonna be successful.
Yep.
Absolutely. I think, you both hit the nail on the head there that, we certainly have the technological infrastructure available to us to take more of a data-centric and data-sharing approach. It is just shifting the paradigm from the human side, whereas it was always conventionally viewed as, a weakness to divulge this, but being able to look past that to see what are the benefits of being able to tap into what was, dubbed your competitors' data, for lack of a better term. And Shalabh, you alluded to this a little bit in your previous answer there, as did you, Cathy. So I'll put this one back over to you. What challenges with stricter ESG mandates relating to carbon emissions? What challenges will stricter ESG mandates relating to carbon emissions create for those in the freight forwarding industry? And how can we leverage tech to help navigate these?
Yeah, I think Nick, the challenges for the freight forwarders come indirectly. As in, for example, if I talk about IMO, which is the regulatory agency for global maritime sector, and which has set up a goal of halving annual greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, right, from 2008 levels, right? Now that puts a lot of onus on major carrier lines to optimize their fuel, to optimize their voyages, to identify new technologies, which kind of, or new propulsion systems which are going to emit less fuel per knot. But I think where it becomes challenging for freight forwarders too is because freight forwarders are the window for a lot of these shippers, importers, exporters to the actual maritime sector, and they want some kind of data or reporting directly from their voyages coming into their systems via freight forwarders, that what was my carbon emission on this particular trade or this particular route, right? So something which with respect to regulations, with respect to new expectations, freight forwarders need to stay on top of. Like I think in last year in US, we were talking about Clean Shipping Act of 2022 yet to be passed, right? So there will be more regulations for different markets, not just for carbon emissions, but from on other fronts also related to ESG that would be coming up. And freight forwarders being that intermediary between all these parties involved, they have to make sure that the shippers are able to meet their reporting challenges, as well as the carriers are able to kind of serve the customers better. And I think with respect to the technology solutions, obviously, again, something which will be, I believe, a lot more initiatives need to be taken by carriers and NVOs, including your GPS tracking, integrated logistics, but something which the freight forwarder community need to integrate with, and make sure their shippers get these insights in a seamless way.
Absolutely. Would love your take on this, Cathy.
So, as I think we're just kind of going, agreeing with each other here, and I do agree. But so you brought up the maritime. So let me bring up the air part. And because I believe that air and ocean, they go step in step with each other. You've got to have both of them in your portfolios, as far as I'm concerned. And there's a lot of pressure on the air freight carriers in particular, because air is viewed as such a dirty mode of transportation. So a lot of them, including the passenger airlines, are beginning to adopt more of a sustainable fuel measures. And some of the freight forwarders, such as Kunanagal, stepping up and embracing this as well. They're offering these services to their customers. If the customer prefers to use an air carrier that has embraced sustainable fuel, they will ensure that that's in place. I was just reading this morning that the British International Freight Association has partnered with a platform called Pledge to help with more to identify sustainable projects and reducing carbon emissions. So they're working more with collaborating with various solutions, hopefully coming out. So I think we'll see more of that, the packaging and such as that. And like you said, the IMO with the ocean freight, huge. And developing, I think we also need to be thinking about some kind of a standardized index or something to measure, because you do have so many indices out there measuring carbon emissions, and they're all off a wee bit. And so maybe this is an opportunity for freight forwarders to step up and be that mediary or such to establish a standard for something such as this.
Yeah, interesting. So just to add to it, Cathy, like a few thoughts that come to my mind. I mean, eventually, a lot of these shippers can start asking their freight forwarders to help them with the overall ESG compliance, and at least from the logistics perspective, and how can the freight forwarders and shippers can depend on the carbon calculation which has been shared by the carriers, giving them some kind of suggestions with respect to routing, with respect to vessels choice, which will help in reduction of these carbon emissions. Maybe that is something which is going to be developed as an expectation or demand from shippers, as well as a opportunity, as you also mentioned, for freight forwarders to differentiate themselves going forward.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if I may, I mean, quite a few of the carriers have established their own measurements.
Yeah.
Understanding those measurements is also important to share with the shippers. And I think the time will come eventually that there is a standardization where everybody embraces the same measurements and not just one carrier's or another's.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to look at some of the regulatory side of things if we're going to get to that one standardized uniform
Yeah.
set of measurement. And I think that will really dictate how quickly this evolves, both from a consumer sentiment and from the various regulatory agencies overseeing it. Now, whether those are positive or negative incentives that force people to evolve, we will have to wait and see. Fantastic. And this rounds us out to our last question. I'll put this over to you, Shalabh, so we can give Cathy the final word. This is really looking to see if you can share any, real world examples of companies that you've seen successfully implement these future-proofing strategies.
Yeah, I think, Nick, lots of examples, and I see freight forwarding companies of all sizes adopting technology to a certain degree. Obviously, if I have to take some of the best examples, Cohen and Nagel, as Cathy also mentioned, for a very long time, they have been talking about three pillars of their business: customer, technology, and people. And have made huge investments into technology from all the different things that we discussed, right? And kind of setting up a example for the entire industry to how to leverage technology. But we have seen smaller companies also in our portfolio who are adopting technology for automation, who are adopting technology for better lead conversion, of adopting technology for better visibility to their clients, right? So yeah, I think there are a lot of examples, and I believe it's a journey. But I think it's a new kind of reality for freight forwarders. I think as we mentioned, maybe the term digital freight forwarder will become irrelevant in few years. Every freight forwarder has to be digital, given the complexity of this particular space. It just matters that what kind of technology you have adopted. Are you measuring the right metrics? It's kind of helping you improve. So your investment is going in the right direction, and using that technology and your overall business strategy, are you building enough differentiation for yourselves in the industry?
Very well put. And with that, we'll give Cathy the final word.
Well, I kind of view this question a little differently. Risk. Okay, so prior to the pandemic, and I know everyone's so tired of hearing prior to the pandemic, but we need to take a step back and look prior to the pandemic here. There are risks. There's always been supply chain risk. And they were just, I think the pandemic just highlighted the need for shippers, freight forwarders, the entire supply chain community to figure out a way how to mitigate risk. I think freight forwarders are in some of the best seat for this. They are so knowledgeable on international transportation, the whole globalization, so to speak. And I think those that, and here comes data again, incorporates like external data into their existing data to try to forecast or to foresee potential risk will also prove beneficial to the shippers, mitigating risk, because we are in such a high risk environment, even more so. It just seems to escalate year after year. And I think those that can mitigate those risks as best as possible, freight forwarders to be able to provide alternative solutions based on that data, that analysis and such, will prove the most successful.
Absolutely. Makes me think of the old adage, we're all hoping for sunshine, but preparing for rain.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Well, I think this has been, a really beneficial session. Certainly very informative for me, and I'm sure our audience will feel the same. We want to thank Cathy again for setting some time aside to participate. If you or your organization has been affected by any of the issues we've discussed, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And if you will be attending TPM this year in February, please feel free to pay Cathy and Shalabh a visit. I'm sure they'd relish the opportunity to connect.